Hello everybody, I'm Mike Hedges, producer, engineer. I've worked with several artists, A Cure, Susie and the Banshees, Manic Street Preachers, Texas, Travis, U2, Dido. First I'm going to apologise because I'm a bit hoarse today, as you can hear. Today I'm here to just talk through the new plugin for Waves, which is the BSS DPR-402, which is a very special compressor, I've got to say. I first came across the DPR-402 in 1987, I guess, 87, 88. At the time, compressors generally made to compress things without actually messing them up. So you could actually compress something, and the ideal for a lot of people was to have a compressor that audio-wise sort of invisible, so you couldn't actually hear the compressor working. And a lot of compressors were like that. They were sort of transparent. And I went to a concert in London, and they had a whole set of BSS compressors and noise gates, and the live engineer who was demonstrating the units, and they were fantastic. They really fucked things up in a really nice way. They were designed for live, and because of that they were quite extreme in what they did. They weren't meant to be subtle. They were meant to be real solid workhorses, really ballsy things. I was working on a Susie and the Banshees record, Peep Show. And the best example of the DPR working on that really is the song Peekaboo. And the drum sound on that was entirely made with the BSS units, mostly with the DPR-402. And it's really quite unusual drum sound if you listen to it. And in 1988, it was certainly a very unusual drum sound. And it was exactly the sort of thing a band like the Banshees would have been looking for, something a bit more radical and something a bit more cutting edge it was at the time. It was quite unusually different to the drums when they first came out. It's not just a compressor, the DPR, it does several things. It has a de-esser built in as well, a really, really nice de-esser, I've got to say. It's a really useful de-esser as opposed to most of the units that were around at the time. And so for vocals, it was fantastic as a straight de-esser. It was absolutely fantastic. But it also has, because of the de-esser, you can do all sorts of tricks with it while you're compressing, and using the de-essing side of it, you can actually alter the frequency of your compression, and you can actually compress different frequencies within the compression. So you can compress just the middle of a drum kit, for example, or just the middle of a bass guitar or another instrument, a guitar you want to cut through. I'm sure a lot of you remember the older generation of recorders remember what hell it was when you had a very, very sibilant vocal, and finding a de-esser that actually could get rid of the S's without totally destroying and putting a lisp into the vocals. And the DPR was one of the better ones of those, and it still is. The plugin still is a really, really great de-esser. And you can also de-ess frequencies on drums and things. So if you've got a stereo drum track and the hi-hats, for example, are a bit out of control, you can actually zoom in on those hi-hats and actually pull them back in the overall mix of the bounce, which is actually really, really useful. The 402 also has, or had the ability at the time, on the back panel to plug in sidechains, for example, so you could do ducking compression. And an example of that would be, say you had a vocal with a very, very strong multiple repeat on it, and you wanted the vocal to come through clearer, you'd put the repeats through the compressor, key it with the vocal. When the vocal was singing, the repeats would all automatically duck under the vocal, and as the gaps in the vocal, it swells back in. And to be quite honestly, we didn't really use it that much because it was in a 19-inch rack and in the back of the rack, and you know what it's like when you've got 18 units in a rack and it's probably the middle one, how difficult it is to get to the back of these things. What Waves have done is they've now put all those back panel additions on the front panel, so you can now test out all those different BSS ideas. One of the new things it's got on the DPR, which is actually extremely useful, is it has an MS mode. So you can actually compress, obviously, one side, both sides become separate in the compressor, they're not linked, and you can compress and affect each side separately. That is incredibly useful, I must say. And it's really great they put it in, is it has a mix control, so you can actually take the effect you have on your DPR in and out of the mix, so you can use half of it at points in the song and you can use it full at other points of the song. And up to now, I've always had to use 2 sets of stereo channels and then fade between the two to use that, but this is actually a single pot, so you can actually switch the mix in and out, and of course you can automate it, which is fantastic. So again, that's another extremely useful piece, which makes it more usable than the original units. I compared it in the studio to the hardware version. And as usual, they've done a really masterful job. We could get exactly the same sound out of the two, out of the hardware version and out of the software version, apart from the De-Essing, which is much more precise in the plugin. And it seems to have, it's just the frequencies seem to be more precise. You can actually be quite clever with it. One of the great tricks with the DPR is to use it 2 or 3 times in a row. I used to have 2 of them, and I often used to go in and out of one, into the second one, in and out of the second one, and so you've got 2 of them to get far more extreme sounds. And obviously you can now do that as a plug a lot easier. Since I've had this plugin, I've used it all the time. I've got to say, I really, really like it.